This is a haunting tale of a cat's vengeance and a dog's worst nightmare. A cat named Whiskers lived in the heart of the bustling city, where glass skyscrapers cast long shadows over the winding streets below. Once a beloved pet, Whiskers had been abandoned when his family moved away, leaving him to fend for himself on the cold, indifferent streets. His once glossy fur was now matted and dull, and his once bright eyes dimmed by hardship. He felt the pang of loneliness and the sting of betrayal. Still, he also harbored a spark of resilience deep within him. Despite his rough exterior, Whiskers was a testament to resilience. He had mastered the art of survival in the unforgiving city, from dodging speeding cars to outwitting territorial alley cats. But the most formidable challenge came from a creature of a different league, a dog named Bruno. Bruno, a massive Rottweiler, was the prized possession of Mrs. Adelaide Kensington, a high society lady who resided in a grand townhouse on Maple Street. She pampered Bruno with the finest of everything. In return, he terrorized the neighborhood, striking fear into the hearts of any creature that dared to cross his path without first asking permission. She taught him well. Everyone has a place, and the Rift Raft had better stay in theirs. Whiskers had encountered Bruno many times, each meeting more harrowing than the last. Bruno would chase Whiskers relentlessly, barking and snarling, his eyes filled with malice. Mrs. Kensington found it amusing, often watching from her porch smugly as Bruno tormented the poor cat. One chilly autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Whiskers limped into a narrow alley, seeking refuge from the biting wind. He curled up behind a stack of old crates, his body aching from the day's trials. As he drifted off to sleep, his mind wandered to thoughts of revenge. He had suffered enough at the paws of Bruno, and it was time to make things right. The following day, Whiskers awoke with a new determination. He observed Bruno and Mrs. Kensington more closely, noting their routines and habits. Mrs. Kensington walked Bruno every morning at precisely 8 a.m., taking the same route through the park and back to Maple Street. Bruno was always off-leash, a testament to her arrogance and confidence in her dog's obedience. Whiskers knew he couldn't confront Bruno head-on. The Rottweiler was far too powerful. Instead, he needed to outsmart him. Over the next few days, Whiskers devised a plan, carefully laying the groundwork for his revenge. On a crisp, clear morning, Whiskers put his plan into action. He watched from a safe distance as Mrs. Kensington and Bruno left their townhouse, heading toward the park. Whiskers followed them, sticking to the shadows, his heart pounding with anticipation. Whiskers darted ahead as they entered the park, weaving through the underbrush until he reached a large oak tree near its center. He climbed the tree swiftly, positioning himself on a sturdy branch that extended over the path. From his vantage point, he could see Mrs. Kensington and Bruno approaching. Whiskers waited patiently, his eyes fixed on his target. When they were directly below him, he sprang into action. He leaped from the branch with a loud yowl, landing squarely on Bruno's back. The Rottweiler yelped in surprise, bucking wildly as Whiskers dug his claws into his fur. Mrs. Kensington screamed, her face contorted in shock and anger. "Get off him, you filthy beast!" she shrieked as her well-manicured nails tried to dislodge Whiskers. But the cat held on tight, hissing and spitting, his claws raking Bruno's skin. Bruno, blinded by pain and fury, took off at a dead run, bolting down the path, with Whiskers clinging to his back. Mrs. Kensington stumbled after them, her shouts growing fainter as the distance between them increased. Whiskers knew the park well and steered Bruno toward a small, hidden pond on the outskirts. When they reached the pond, Whiskers released his grip, leaping off Bruno and landing gracefully on the ground. Bruno skidded to a halt, his paws slipping on the wet grass, and he tumbled headfirst into the murky water. The Rottweiler thrashed and splashed, trying to find his footing, but the thick mud sucked at his legs, pulling him down. Whiskers watched from the shore, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Bruno's struggles grew weaker as he sank deeper into the mud, his barks becoming desperate whimpers. Finally, with a last pitiful yelp, Bruno disappeared beneath the surface, the water closing over his head. Mrs. Kensington arrived moments later, her face pale with fear. She called out for Bruno, her voice trembling, but there was no response. She waded into the pond, her designer shoes sinking into the mud, but it was too late. Bruno was gone. Whiskers slipped away, leaving Mrs. Kensington to mourn her beloved pet. He returned to the alley where he had spent so many lonely nights, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Bruno's reign of terror was over, and Whiskers could finally rest. He had transformed from a victim of circumstance to a hero, standing up for himself and the other animals Bruno had tormented. In the following days, the neighborhood buzzed with the news of Bruno's disappearance. Mrs. Kensington was inconsolable, but the other residents, though sympathetic, couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The park was peaceful once more, and Whiskers roamed freely, no longer haunted by the fear of Bruno's attacks. The community's response highlighted the impact of Whiskers' actions and the importance of standing up against injustice. But Whiskers knew that his victory came at a cost. Though he had avenged himself and the other animals Bruno had tormented, he couldn't shake the image of the Rottweiler's final moments. The memory of Bruno's desperate eyes, filled with terror and confusion, haunted his dreams. As the weeks turned into months, Whiskers found solace in the small acts of kindness from the people in the neighborhood. They left out bowls of food and water for him, offering him shelter on cold nights. Slowly, Whiskers began to heal, both physically and emotionally. He learned to trust again, finding companionship in the stray cats and friendly humans who crossed his path. But the lesson of Bruno's fate stayed with him. Whiskers understood that while revenge had brought him a fleeting sense of justice, it had also taken something from him. He vowed to use his newfound strength and wisdom, not for vengeance, but for protection. He pledged to shield the vulnerable, ensuring that no other animal would suffer as he had. This transformation from a vengeful cat to a compassionate protector was a testament to the power of change. This journey inspired those who witnessed it. One rainy evening, as Whiskers lay curled up in a cozy cardboard box behind a cafe, he heard a faint meow. He saw a tiny, bedraggled kitten peering at him from the shadows. The kitten's eyes were wide with fear, its small body trembling from the cold. Whiskers approached the kitten slowly, his heart aching with empathy. He gently nuzzled the kitten, offering warmth and reassurance. The kitten, sensing the kindness in Whiskers' eyes, relaxed and allowed itself to be led to the safety of the box. From that night on, Whiskers became a guardian, watching over the neighborhood's strays and abandoned pets. He taught them how to survive, sharing his knowledge and experience. In doing so, he found a new purpose that filled the emptiness his quest for revenge left. Whiskers had come full circle, transforming from a victim to a protector. His journey had been fraught with hardship and pain, but it had also led him to a place of understanding and compassion. As he lay in his box, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the city, Whiskers knew that he had finally found his place in the world. And though the shadows of his past would always be a part of him, Whiskers faced the future with hope, his spirit unbroken, and his heart open to the possibility of new beginnings. Thanks for joining me, but before you go, take advantage of my next haunting tale of cat ingenuity. Subscribe now, or you may become the next casualty. You've been warned.